This past weekend I competed in Ludum Dare 47. It's a game dev competition where you get 48 hours to build a game based upon a theme that is released when it all starts. The theme this time around was Stuck in a Loop. The entire process of me creating this game was filmed all live over on twitch.tv/turkeydev, so if you're not already following me there, go follow me there. I usually do stream these Ludum Dare stuff as well as on my other projects, so feel free to check me out there. Before I show off the game, let me show you guys how I got here and the process I took to make the game. To start all off, once the theme was released, I had to come up with ideas to base my game around. The ideas that we had initially were some sort of platformer as well as a racing game, because racing always has loops and it's a very natural idea for making a game based on this theme. In the end, we ended up choosing a platformer that was beating the level where you had a certain amount of time, and if you did beat the level in that amount of time, it reset, causing the loop that the theme is based around. Now that we had a basic idea of the core concepts of the game, the first thing to do was to actually get stuff rendering and to get very basic player movement. I started off here with just a red box that you could move around with your arrow keys. Because the movement was something that was different than what I'm used to doing in a game, I spent the next little while trying to get that nailed down. Essentially, I wanted the player to be more or less centered in the screen and have the screen components or the walls and other stuff in the level be moving around the player instead of you moving the player through the map. I only wanted this to happen though while you were kind of inside the middle of the level, or if you're on the edges or the corners, the map would then stop moving and the player would. This way you keep as much content on the screen as possible, yet you can still move about and it doesn't kind of feel awkward. With basic game movement out of the way, the next step was basic game physics, the first of which was gravity, and after a few false starts where the player was launched in the opposite direction due to the Y values being inverted everywhere in the game. This is a very common theme that I deal with and it was very annoying, but I eventually kind of worked through it. I finally had the player now colliding with the box and also being affected by gravity, and soon I would actually add the jumping abilities. Next up was to add entities into the game. I started with just a door, key, and button to play around with. One thing I didn't like about this game that I kind of regret doing, but just in the time I did it because it was easy enough, and Ludum Dare you kind of have to make a lot of decisions that you don't fully agree with, was the fact that everything in this game was an entity. The doors were an entity, the key, which did make sense, an entity, the button was an entity, just everything that was kind of rendered on the screen that you could interact with was considered an entity. Now, it wasn't terrible, but at the same time having a doorway entity kind of felt a little weird. But anyways, it worked out. You could collect a key, which was the yellow dot you saw, and you could run through a door that would unlock it, and you could pass through the door, but then every other door that you didn't have a key to would be closed and not be passable. As Friday night came to a close for me, I finished up adding buttons that could be mounted on the wall and could be there pressed on the wall, and also adding double jump, which when you picked it up allowed you to jump second time while in the air. Saturday morning kicked off for me with level loading. All my levels in this game were defined in JSON and were loaded in as such and dumped into world objects. I preferred this way just because I think it's a little bit cleaner to work with JSON for all the levels to define the entities, the walls, all that, than to do it all in code. Once I got my test level loaded up, this time through the JSON file instead of being all defined in code, I then moved on to asset creation. I then created textures for my key, the double jump icon that you could pick up in the world, and then also the player. The player was very difficult for me. I'm not the greatest texture asset creation person, but eventually got the player done and even added animation frames for the player when they were walking. I capped off the texture making process by making a jumping animation texture for the player, making the door texture both locked and unlocked variants. I made the button with pressed and unpressed variants. And then finally I made an exit door texture, which is just the regular door texture, but green. This was the texture of the door that when you exited or went through, you could then complete the level and move on to the next one. In the end, it felt like a big step up from the colored rectangles they were before, and it felt much more like a game now. I spent the rest of the first half of my Saturday streams working on sounds and adding sound effects to all of the items, the player movement, all that type of stuff. At the end of the first half of my Saturday stream, this is what our game looked like and also sounded like. Okay. This is good starts. This is good sound starts, chat. I then returned that evening to start the polishing process of the game. I first started adding a notification to the game where when you walked over the exit door and had not completed all the tasks, you could not go through the door, and it gave you a notification. This was eventually kind of scrapped and changed to just a little text box pop up above the door, but this was the initial start. That pop-up came around because of this. This was what I called a note, and it was where you walked over this little exclamation point, you would see a text box pop up with a note or text about it that would drive the whole intro levels and drive the tutorial system. Speaking of intro and tutorial levels, that's what the rest of the night was spent on, was generating these tutorial intro levels that give you a overview of the game, the controls, how to play, what the game is about, and just walking you through each aspect of the game. Suddenly it was all about rounding up the game and polishing it, starting with adding sound effects to the things that were still missing them, and adding some more levels to increase the game's playability. Lastly, I did a UI overhaul essentially, where I just changed up the colors of the bottom kind of hotbar, as well as changing the text of the whole game. And then finally I moved on to adding the other screens that were the main menu, the credits, and the level selection. And that's it, that completed my game for Ludum Dare 47. So this is it. This is the game that I made in 48 hours for Ludum Dare 47. It is called a time loop, and as you saw from the recap there is a whole tutorial system, level select, there's a play. I'm going to skip the tutorial just because I know about it, but when you play the game, or if you want to play the game, feel free to start with that. But essentially you just have to beat each level in the time frame that is given here. You got to pick up the keys to unlock doors, and also hit all the buttons to unlock the final exit door. Failing to complete the game in the time frame resets it all, causing you to then have to beat it again. This is where the loop part of the theme comes in, and honestly I was pretty happy with how this game turned out. The timers are all pretty tight, which is by design, but in the end there are 5 playable worlds, and again, I am happy with how this game turned out. I am happy that I didn't overscope for once. Usually my Ludum Dare games turn into me overscoping the game, and the game doesn't turn out as good as I want it, but yeah, so anyways, hope you guys enjoyed this video here. Again, feel free to check out my Ludum Dare 47 game, follow me on Twitch and all that stuff. But anyways, thank you guys for watching. I'll see you guys all later. Peace out.